Confucius was a Chinese philosopher who lived during the Ming Dynasty. That is false. Confucius was indeed a Chinese philosopher, but he was much earlier than the Ming Dynasty. The Chinese imperial system had long been developed before the Ming Dynasty, of which Confucius's thought, his philosophy, was an important part. Zheng He was a Chinese explorer. That is false. He was not an explorer. Remember, he didn't know where he was going. However, he did lead an armada, a very large number of ships, from China to India, Africa, much of Southeast Asia, proving that the Chinese did have the technical ability and resources to go out and explore had they wanted to, but it'd be much more accurate just to say he was a Chinese admiral. He was an explorer. He knew exactly where he was going and how to get there. Matteo Ricci was a Catholic missionary who introduced China to Western science. That is a true statement. The Qing ruled the Manchu Dynasty. That is a false statement. It should be reversed. The Manchu were the ethnic group who ruled, from which the Chinese ruling family came during this time period. They were not Han Chinese. They were Manchu. That was their ethnic group. It's like saying someone's Irish or French. The Qing Dynasty is the government, right? So the Manchu ethnic group ran the government of China, known as the Qing Dynasty. Kangxi was a Joseon emperor who convinced the Chinese to accept his rule by following Confucius. That is false. Kangxi was a Qing emperor who convinced the Chinese to accept his rule by following Confucius. Joseon refers to the Korean dynasty. Sejong was a Joseon Korean king who invented Hangeul. That is true. Remember, Hangeul is the Korean alphabet. The Imjin War began when China invaded Japan through Korea. That is false. The Imjin War began when Japan invaded China through Korea, though the Japanese never actually got to China. They were trying to, but they never actually got there because the Chinese and the Koreans stopped them. The Japanese emperor, who was believed to be the descendant of Amaterasu, appointed the most powerful samurai to be shogun. That is true. Tokugawa Ieyasu united Japan and was named shogun. That is true. Byzantium followed Sunni Islam and is connected to modern-day Turkey. That is false, in the sense that Byzantium, though it did rule the territory connected to modern-day Turkey, was Orthodox Christian, not Muslim. Ismail tried to unify the Safavid Empire using Shi'a Islam. That is true. The Caliph is the successor of Muhammad. That is true. Mehmet was an Ottoman emperor who used his janissaries to conquer Byzantium by taking its capital, Constantinople. That is true. Taqiyuddin was a Mughal astronomer. That is false. The Mughals were associated with India. Taqiyuddin was associated with Turkey and thus the Ottoman Empire. So Taqiyuddin was an Ottoman astronomer. Akbar was a Mughal emperor who built the Taj Mahal. That is false. Akbar is known for religious tolerance. Shah Jahan built the Taj Mahal. Aurangzeb was a Mughal emperor who followed a policy of religious tolerance. That is false. Akbar was a Mughal emperor who followed a policy of religious tolerance. Aurangzeb followed a policy of religious intolerance. He tried to make Hindus convert to Islam, leading to lots of problems and the eventual division of the Mughal Empire after he died. Shah Jahan was a Mughal emperor who banned Sati completely. That is false. First of all, it was Jahangir who was most concerned with the policy of Sati, that practice of burning widows. But Jahangir, so Jahangir was the one who would deal with Sati, but he didn't ban it completely. As a devout Muslim, he didn't want people burning widows, and whether voluntarily or involuntarily, but he was also afraid that if he forbade the practice completely, it would lead to a Hindu rebellion. So Jahangir banned Sati in most, but not all cases. Remember, he said that if you were a woman who had children, you could not have Sati, for example, and there was no compulsion allowed. But he didn't ban it completely. So if you were a young woman who did not have children, you could indeed choose to do that. Louis XIV is best connected to democracy. That is false. He's best connected to royal absolutism and divine right, meaning the king gets to do what he wants because God made him king. John Locke was a political philosopher who argued that governments exist to protect property. That is true. Remember, he's also the guy that wrote the first constitution for the Carolinas. Nicholas Copernicus was a genius who, while working alone, discovered that the earth went around the sun. It is true what he discovered, but remember, he was working in a community of scholars, right? One thing I tried to emphasize was that scholars didn't just work on their own. Isaac Newton believed that religion hindered science. That is false. He believed that the two went together just fine. He thought that by discovering scientific laws, you were discovering how God had created the universe in a reasonable way. Frederick was a Russian who saw that science allowed for accurate artillery. That is false. He was a Prussian. Prussia is basically the country that will go on to unify German-speaking states to form Germany. Adam Smith applied the insights of scientists to the economy. That is true. Adam Smith was what we would call a social scientist. He tried to figure out the laws governing human society, in this case, how the economy works, how people behave economically. Catherine the Great was an enlightened despot and therefore encouraged equality among her people. That is false, right? Catherine did not believe in equality. She thought that she was superior because of her intelligence and education, because she was the queen or the empress of Russia. So she did not try and make people equal, but she did try and bring enlightened rule. So she tried to rule her government along scientific theories in terms of what they would understand as enlightened laws, but that didn't bring in democracy. George Washington defeated the British Army single-handedly. That is false. We had lots of help from the French especially, but also the Spanish. Louis XVI was allowed to stay king by the French revolutionaries, proving how conservative they were. That is false. They cut off his head, proving how radical they were. Robespierre was a radical French revolutionary who launched the terror. That is true. Olympia de Gouges is famous for assassinating a radical revolutionary during the French Revolution. That is false. It was Charlotte Corday who did that. Olympia de Gouges was different. She, remember, was the woman who was argued basically that women should have the same rights as men because women could be smart and patriotic and educated. And why give all men the right to vote and not give it to women when you could be given the right to vote to men who were ignorant, uneducated, criminal, whatever? Certainly women could also contribute. She was not, though, executed for those ideas. She was executed simply because she was a conservative revolutionary. The radical revolutionaries did not like that. Charlotte Corday is famous for assassinating a radical revolutionary during the French Revolution, showing that women could take political action on their own. Napoleon Bonaparte made his army more loyal to him than the French Republic, and so was able to seize power. That is true. Toussaint Louverture was a slave who led a successful slave rebellion in Haiti. That is mostly true, but it's false because he wasn't simply a slave. He was a freed slave. He had that experience of being a slave, so he knew being a slave was terrible. But because he had gone on from being a slave, had become free and owned his own plantations, he also understood administration, and he also had received an education, giving the slave rebellion an able leader. James Watt developed an efficient steam engine. That is true. The bourgeoisie were a middle class of people with technical knowledge whose skills were needed in an industrial economy. That is true. And that ends this part.